I'm Daniel, 35, and my parents sold the lake house my grandfather left me. My inheritance, my home to fund my sister's $500,000 wedding without even telling me. I found out when I drove up to Crystal Lake and saw strangers setting up tents on my property. They used an old medical power of attorney from when I was sick to fake my permission. And when I confronted them, they said I was being selfish. That's when I realized I wasn't just left out. I was erased, so I sued them, and I won. But the victory wasn't the lawsuit. It was what I did after. If you've ever been betrayed by your own family, you're going to want to hear this. I remember the sunlight hitting the pavement outside the airport in Portland when I stepped out of the terminal tired from a 2-week project in Milan. I had no idea that my life back home had been quietly gutted while I was gone. The first sign was a tax notice I picked up from the stack of mail piled on the kitchen counter of my downtown apartment. It wasn't even addressed to me. It was forwarded from Crystal Lake and it named new owners. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a clerical error or a spam letter. But then I read the fine print. My name was nowhere on the property anymore. I stood frozen. My chest tightened in a way that made breathing feel like a choice I had to remember how to make. That house wasn't just a piece of land or timber. It was my inheritance, my grandfather's legacy, the place I spent every summer learning how to hold a hammer, balance a beam, and respect the grain of old pine. I called my mother immediately. She picked up on the third ring, her voice casual like we hadn't spoken just 2 weeks ago. "Hey, honey, how was Milan? Did you sell the lake house?" There was a pause. I could hear dishes clinking in the background, the sound of the dishwasher humming. "Oh, that. We made a decision. Your father and I thought it was time. It was sitting empty, Daniel." I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. It wasn't sitting empty. It was mine. Grandpa left it to me. You knew that. She sighed the way she always did when I brought up boundaries she didn't think should apply to family. "Emma and Colton's wedding is coming up and we needed the funds. You're doing well, sweetie. You have your firm, your projects. Emma needed this." I stared at my phone like it might morph into a time machine and pull me back into a version of my life where this betrayal hadn't happened. She kept talking, but I wasn't hearing her anymore. My ears were ringing with a fury I hadn't felt since I was 10 and Emma got away with taking apart my science project. I hung up. 2 days later, I drove out to Crystal Lake. I had to see it with my own eyes. The turn into the gravel driveway was still familiar, but everything else felt foreign. The front yard was filled with vans from a high-end event company. Tents were being erected. Floral arrangements were being unloaded by young women in black polos and headsets. I parked and stepped out of the car, dazed. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" A man with a clipboard turned to me, surprised. "Lakeview Weddings, full ceremony and reception setup. You must be family." The bride's mother said the house belongs to them now. I couldn't respond. The porch where Grandpa and I used to drink lemonade after fixing the canoe was covered in white silk bunting. I felt like a ghost visiting my own life. A familiar voice called my name from the cafe across the road. "Helen Price. We grew up building sandcastles on the lake shore together before life pushed us apart. Daniel, God, it's been forever." I crossed the road and hugged her too tight, maybe. "Did you know about the house?" She nodded, her face falling. "Everyone's been talking about it. Your parents said you signed something, that you were fine with it." I didn't. I never signed anything to sell it. I signed a temporary tax document years ago when I was sick. That was it. Her eyes widened. "You need to talk to someone." "I already did," I said quietly. "But I'm going to talk to someone else now." because that house wasn't theirs to sell, and they didn't just sell it. They sold it to throw a $500,000 wedding. I turned back toward the house and watched as workers laid out the welcome board with Emma and Colton's names etched in gold foil. It used to say Walter Bennett there. Now it says Emma. I stood in the middle of the gravel staring at a home that was no longer mine and realized something deeper than anger had started to set in. They didn't even tell me. Not a phone call. Not a warning. Nothing. I remember the first time Grandpa Walter handed me a hammer. I was 8, maybe 9. The old footbridge at the edge of the property had rotted out, and instead of calling a contractor, he looked at me and said, "Daniel, let's build it ourselves." We spent 3 weekends measuring planks, learning about supports, and arguing over which screws would hold best. I thought he was a magician. He could lift beams like he was 30 years younger, and he could spot a crooked nail from a mile away. That bridge became more than just wood and nails. It was our classroom, our confession booth, our war zone. Every summer after that, we picked a project. A bench, a birdhouse, replacing the boathouse roof. I learned how to square angles, read blueprints, stain properly. But more than that, I learned how to listen. Grandpa didn't talk a lot, but when he did, it mattered. He'd say things like, "Build with respect," or "Don't rush what you want to last." I didn't realize then that he wasn't just talking about construction. When he passed away in 2019, I wasn't surprised to find out he left the lakehouse to me. What surprised me was how my parents reacted. Cold, reserved, as if Grandpa had committed some betrayal by trusting me more than them. They didn't fight it, though, not openly. My mother smiled too wide at the reading of the will, and my father didn't say much at all. They just assumed I think that I'd never really use it, that I'd be too busy, that I wouldn't care. In 2021, I was dealing with a health scare. Nothing life-threatening, but it knocked me off my feet for a few months. I was in and out of treatments out of the country briefly. My dad offered to handle the property taxes for that year. I was grateful, overwhelmed. I signed a document giving him temporary authorization to manage payments and mail while I was recovering. I never imagined they'd keep a copy, that they'd use it years later to sell the place, that they'd pretend I had been part of the decision. Standing at the edge of the property that day, watching strangers reshape my memories into a photo backdrop for a wedding, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in the wind. "Don't rush what you want to last." I sat down on the wooden bench under the old cedar tree we planted together. It had grown tall, strong, stubborn, just like he said it would. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Emma. "Hope you're not mad. It's for the greater good." I stared at it, unsure if I wanted to laugh, scream, or throw the phone into the lake. Greater good. She never saw what this place really meant. To her, it was just a picturesque venue, a storybook setting, a stage, not a home, not a legacy. I opened my notes app and wrote down everything I could remember about that authorization letter. Where it was stored, what it said, the date I signed it. I'd deal with the emotions later. Right now, I needed to find a lawyer. Because I wasn't letting them rewrite history just because I had been too tired to stop them. Emma has always been the star, not the hard-working, behind-the-scenes kind of star, but the kind whose light was carefully curated through ring lights and Instagram filters. At 31, she'd built a decent following, posting makeup tutorials, lifestyle vlogs, and pictures of brunch with captions like "living my best life." Her success, if you could call it that, was an extension of my parents' money and unwavering devotion. She never paid rent, never worried about bills. Mom and Dad covered her car, her trips, even the cosmetic procedures she whispered about in hushed tones over family dinners. Meanwhile, when I needed help launching my architecture firm, all I got was a quick good luck and a pat on the back. I still remember 2018 like it was yesterday. I had an old Toyota I used to drive out to site visits. Nothing fancy, but it ran. One afternoon I came home to find it missing from the driveway. I thought it had been stolen, called the police, filed a report, only to learn later that my father had traded it in without telling me. The money went toward buying Emma a new Audi. When I confronted them, they didn't deny it. My dad said, "You work downtown now. You don't need a car. Emma needs to be mobile for her brand." My brand was blueprints and concrete. Hers was curated perfection and product placements. Family dinners were always performances. I'd start to talk about a project I was proud of, maybe a library remodel or a green roofing system, and within seconds the attention would shift. "Daniel's working on a new city building." "That's nice, dear." "Emma, tell us about your brand partnership." And Emma would light up, launching into a rehearsed story about a skincare line flying her out to Palm Springs, or how she might get a billboard in downtown LA if the metrics looked good. Even holidays were wrapped in imbalance. One Christmas, I gave my parents a custom-built coffee table made from reclaimed wood. Spent weeks designing and assembling it. Emma gave them matching robes and a selfie book. Guess which gift made them cry? It was hard not to keep score. I didn't want to. I told myself family shouldn't be about tallying wins and losses. But it was exhausting being invisible in a house that kept applauding the same person over and over. I used to think maybe it was because she was the youngest, the only girl. That maybe they worried about her more. But as we got older, it became obvious that they simply liked who she was better. Or maybe who she pretended to be. I scrolled through her Instagram that night after texting the lawyer. There she was posing with Colton in front of a mock archway that looked suspiciously like one I designed for a museum entrance 2 years ago. #blessed. #forever. I didn't hate her. That was the worst part. I envied her. I resented her. But underneath all of it, I just wanted her to see me, to say, "You worked hard. You earned it." Instead, she sent me a picture of a sample menu for the wedding. 6 courses, imported wines, a vegan option for Colton's sister. At the bottom of the message, she added, "You're still invited. We can seat you near the cake if that's okay." Near the cake. I shut off my phone and dropped it face down on the table. The bench creaked under me as I leaned back and stared up at the branches swaying in the twilight. They'd built a shrine to Emma on top of my history, and they were handing her the altar. I stood up and walked back to the rental car. There was only so much memory I could take before it started to rewrite itself into something bitter. The next step wasn't emotion. It was strategy. They picked their favorite. Now it was time I picked a fight worth having. I drove back to Crystal Lake the next morning. Not to reminisce, not to mourn, but to see the battlefield. A place I used to run barefoot through pine needles had been overtaken by floral arrangements, rented gazebos, and sound engineers testing speaker systems with pop songs that echoed off the water like static in my ears. The main lawn had been cleared of the swing set and hammock I helped Grandpa install. In their place stood a tent larger than my apartment, draped in cream-colored canvas and trimmed in soft gold. Someone was setting up rows of white wooden chairs that looked like they were imported straight out of a bridal magazine. Helen spotted me before I crossed the street. She waved from the cafe door, a towel slung over her shoulder, and her hair pulled into a knot that told me she'd been working since dawn. "They've been at it all week," she said as I walked up. "You okay?" "They sold it 3 weeks ago, without a word." I stared out at the house. I guess I'm just here to see the scene of the crime. Helen glanced toward the tent. "Emma's been in and out. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. Everyone's assuming you approved it." I shook my head. I didn't. I never would have. She looked down, jaw tight. That's what I thought. A familiar voice cut across the lawn. Daniel, you're here. My mother stood a few feet away in a slate blue cardigan and pearls like she was hosting a Sunday tea, not invading sacred ground. Her tone was light rehearsed. We weren't sure if you'd show up before the big day. I didn't say anything, just stared. She smiled thin and full of apology without meaning. It's a beautiful setup, isn't it? Emma wanted something perfect, something unforgettable. We're finally giving her the start she deserves. You didn't have the right, I said. My voice flat. This house was mine. Grandpa left it to me. She tilted her head. You weren't using it. It was sitting there collecting dust. Emma needed this, Daniel. And you of all people should understand what family sacrifices look like. You're her big brother. I stepped closer. I am also the legal owner. You had no right to sell something that wasn't yours. Her smile faded. You signed over temporary rights. Don't pretend you don't remember. And frankly, you should be grateful. All we've ever done is support you. Support me. You sold my inheritance to throw a party. That's not support. She crossed her arms. Watch your tone. We did what was best for everyone. You're being selfish. I laughed a short, bitter sound. Selfish. That's rich. She turned her back to me and walked toward the tent. I followed slowly, weaving through the setup. On a large corkboard near the entrance was a printed itinerary titled, The Wedding Weekend of Emma Bennett and Colton Reyes. Underneath it were laminated spreadsheets with catering menus, lighting plans, seating charts. I counted 3 florists, 2 live bands, and a budget breakdown that made my stomach churn. Estimated total $528, $400. I took a photo with my phone. Proof. Documentation. Not because I needed more reasons to be angry, but because this was no longer just emotional. This was evidence. I stepped back, trying to take it all in. The tent, the dock, the altered house. It was no longer a home. It was a venue, and I was no longer a son. I was an obstacle. I left Crystal Lake before the sun dipped too low. The road blurred in front of me, not from the failing light, but from the weight of everything I had seen. My phone buzzed twice in the passenger seat. Sophie. I hadn't told her yet. She was the one person who would see this not just as betrayal, but as actionable. She opened the door before I knocked barefoot, and holding a mug of tea, her eyes narrowing at the expression I wore. Something happened, she said. I handed her the manila envelope, copies of tax forms, photos of the wedding setup, and the deed transfer notification I found in my mailbox that started it all. She sat down on the couch legs tucked under her and began flipping through the documents in silence. I watched her eyes scan each line, jaw tightening by degrees. You said you signed temporary power of attorney in 2021? She asked finally. Yeah, when I was in the hospital. It was limited, only for that year's tax processing. I never thought they'd keep using it. She nodded slowly, then pulled out her laptop and began typing. If they use that same authorization to execute a sale in 2024, that's a problem. A big one. Did you revoke it formally? I frowned. I didn't even think I had to. I assumed it expired automatically. Sophie shook her head. Power of attorney documents can expire by date event or revocation. If it didn't have an expiration clause, they might argue it's still valid. But even then, it doesn't extend to property sales unless specified. We need to read the original form. She stood, rummaged through her bookshelf, and pulled out a legal template binder. I watched her switch modes from girlfriend to attorney, and I was equal parts grateful and terrified. We need to get a copy from the county office, she said, dialing a number. If they filed it during the property transfer, we'll know exactly what they used. 30 minutes later, she had it on her screen. She motioned for me to come closer. Here, this is what your dad submitted. A scanned copy of the 2021 authorization. No expiration. No clause for real estate. So they used a 2-year-old document not legally sufficient to sell a house that wasn't theirs to sell. That's what it looks like. My hands curled into fists. Can we fight it? She leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin. It's murky, but the lack of specificity helps you. And the timing is suspect, especially if there's evidence they concealed the transaction or misled the buyer. The fact that you weren't notified is huge. I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it all. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was fraud. Sophie reached into the envelope and pulled out the event budget I had printed. Her brows rose. Over $500,000, all of it funded by selling my inheritance. They didn't just throw a wedding, they cashed in a legacy. She flipped it over, noting a line at the bottom in small type. What's this? She pointed to a footnote. Post-event transition plan to convert residents into short-term luxury rental pending final approval from Dwellscape Partners. What the hell is Dwellscape Partners? I asked. She typed it into her laptop, brows furrowed. Real estate investment group. They specialize in lakefront conversions, upscale weekend getaways. Looks like your parents already signed a provisional lease. Starts 1 month after the wedding. So it wasn't even about Emma's fairy tale day. It was a business move. She nodded. A very profitable one. If the rental hits their numbers, Dwellscape has an option to buy outright in 18 months. I stared at the screen, the numbers, the emails, the footnotes. They had planned all of it, down to the last wine pairing and the monthly yield projections. It was never about dust or Emma's new beginning. It was about cashing in while smiling for the cameras. My parents didn't just lie to me. They built a lie and furnished it with flowers, guest lists, and champagne. Sophie looked up at me. We need to act fast. Once the wedding is over and the guests are gone, they'll finalize that deal. If we want to stop it, we start now. I nodded, the fire inside me no longer rage but focus, cold and sharp. I wasn't letting them lock me out of this house twice. Not when they used my name to steal it in the first place. Colton Hayes looked exactly how I imagined someone born into a Napa Valley wine dynasty would look. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, designer shoes. He probably never had to shine himself. But what caught me off guard was how polite he was, gracious even, maybe too much. He met me at a vineyard-themed bar downtown, probably thinking it was neutral ground. I had called earlier that morning, asked if we could talk. No agenda, just 2 men having a conversation. Thanks for meeting, I said as we sat down. He nodded. Emma said you might reach out. Look, I don't want to be in the middle of family stuff. I get it. This isn't about family drama. It's about something bigger. I pulled out the budget spreadsheet and the copy of the deed transfer. He glanced at them, then looked back at me with a mild, practiced smile. This really isn't my lane, man. You know wedding stuff is Emma's thing. I'm just trying to be supportive. Do you know how the wedding's being paid for? He hesitated, then shrugged. Emma said your parents were helping. It's their house, right? No. It was my house. Left to me by my grandfather. They sold it behind my back using an expired power of attorney. He blinked. Wait, what? I handed him the documents. He skimmed the highlights, jaw tightening. This isn't legal. Exactly. And now there's a signed lease with a real estate firm to convert the house into a vacation rental after the wedding. He leaned back in his chair, brows furrowed. I didn't know anything about that. Of course you didn't. Because they don't want you to. Because you have a name, a reputation. This wedding isn't just a celebration. It's a business merger. He exhaled slowly. I knew they were spending a lot. Emma kept saying it had to be perfect, but I thought it was just wedding stress, its image. Your family's name tied to the Bennett brand makes headlines. Emma's not just marrying you, she's leveling up, and my house is her launch pad. He was quiet for a moment. Look, I love her, but if any of this gets messy, I can't be involved. I'm not saying I won't support you, but I need to think about how this affects everyone. Everyone. Or just your board of directors. He didn't answer, just looked away. I stood up. Think fast, Colton, because when this story breaks, your name will be on it too, whether you like it or not. I left him at the bar, sipping a drink he barely touched. Back in my car, I pulled up Emma's social media. Her stories were full of cake tastings and floral mock-ups. But one post had been taken down, one I remembered seeing earlier. A boomerang of her and Colton laughing over wine captioned with "Forever starts now." Something felt off. I opened our old group chat from college. Buried deep in the archive were screenshots from years ago. One from Emma to her ex-boyfriend dated just months before she met Colton. I don't think I've ever really loved anyone before. Not the way I loved you. Another from a week later. I'm only with him because my parents think he's good for the brand. I froze. I switched over to a photo Sophie had sent earlier. It was taken the day before. Emma near the dock phone to her ear, red-eyed pacing. In the background, her voice had carried just enough. "Please don't do this now," she had said. "Please not before the wedding." I closed my phone slowly. All of this, the house, the money, the venue, the wedding. It was all smoke and mirrors, a production set held together by curated posts and stunts. Emma wasn't just building a brand. She was burying the truth beneath satin and candlelight, and I had just found the first loose thread. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but I knew one thing. Lies like that didn't stay hidden forever. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house in West Lynn. It felt like preparing for battle, not because I was ready to fight, but because I was finally ready to hear whatever truth they'd been crafting behind closed doors. Dad answered the door. He wore a navy sweater, coffee in hand, the picture of suburban peace. When he saw my face, he knew it wasn't a social visit. "We need to talk," I said. He stepped aside and led me into the living room. Mom was already on the couch, flipping through a wedding magazine. She didn't look up. "What is it now, Daniel?" she said, like I was interrupting a grocery list. I stayed standing. "You sold a house that wasn't yours. You used a document that was outdated and unauthorized, and you lied about it." To my face, Dad sighed, setting his cup down. "It wasn't like that. Then what was it like you stole from me?" He looked up, voice calm. "You weren't using it. It was sitting there. We made a decision for the good of the family. For Emma, you mean?" He didn't respond. "You know what hurts the most? I'm not even angry about the money. Or the house. I'm angry that it never occurred to either of you to ask me. Like my voice didn't matter. Like I didn't matter." Mom finally looked up. "Daniel, we didn't think it was a big deal. You're successful. You've always figured things out on your own. Emma's different. She needs support." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "You mean she needs handouts?" Dad's voice dropped. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When I needed a car to drive to job sites, you sold mine and bought Emma an Audi. When I got promoted, you changed the subject to her YouTube views. Every birthday, every holiday, every conversation, it always circled back to her." "She's the youngest. She's more sensitive," Dad said quietly. "We worry about her, and I'm the workhorse, the backup plan." "No one said that. You didn't have to." My throat burned. I hadn't cried in front of them since high school, but the lump in my chest cracked open and my eyes blurred. "I was never your second child. I was your second thought." Silence fell over the room. The magazine slipped from Mom's hand. Dad leaned forward. "We're sorry you feel that way. But there's nothing we can do now. The wedding is happening, the sale is done, you need to move on. Move on. He nodded. Don't let this consume you. It's not worth it. I wiped my face. You're right, it's not worth it. I turned and walked out the door. By the time I reached my car, my hands had stopped shaking. The grief had calcified into something cold and clean. That night I sent Sophie everything. Every document, every photo, every timestamp. Let's file the suit, I told her. She called within minutes. Are you sure this won't be quiet? Good. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to fix things. I wanted to be heard. In court, on paper, in front of the world. I wasn't the second child. I was the one they thought they could take from. And they were wrong. Sophie filed the suit that morning. Civil fraud, unauthorized property transfer, emotional damages. She said the language was tight and aggressive, just the way we needed it to be. I thanked her, then drove into town. Helen was behind the counter at Maple Bean, her tiny cafe a block from the community center. She handed me a coffee before I asked. You look like someone who hasn't slept in 2 days. Try 4, I said, sitting down. She leaned in. You still want people to know what's happening? I nodded. She pulled a card from her apron. Derek Ellison, independent journalist, used to cover politics. Now he does long-form stories on local corruption and real estate abuse. He hates developers. Perfect, I said. She texted him, and 20 minutes later he walked in. Mid-30s, denim jacket, camera bag, notebook already open. He asked questions, a lot of them. Dates, names, motivation, copies of every legal form Sophie had filed. He didn't flinch when I told him it was my own parents. The next day, his article went live on a local blog. Lake lies the family betrayal behind. Crystal Shore's newest wedding venue. It spread faster than I expected. By evening, the comments section exploded. Neighbors, high school classmates, strangers who'd driven past the lake and remembered the old wood dock. People were furious. Not just at the betrayal, but at the idea of their quiet corner being turned into a vacation machine. The next morning, I got a call from the city's zoning office. Someone had filed a complaint, 3 others followed by lunch. Helen called just after noon. You're trending, in the bad way, but also kind of the heroic way. I laughed for the first time in days. Then my phone rang again, my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, Dad called. I answered. What the hell do you think you're doing? He snapped. Standing up for myself, for Grandpa's legacy, for the community. You're ruining your sister's wedding. No, you ruined it when you used my name to sell my house. There was silence, then a quieter voice. Daniel, be reasonable. You're blowing this up for nothing. That house was just sitting there. It wasn't nothing. It was mine. And you didn't even ask. He sighed. Do you really want to tear this family apart over some old wood and water? I stared out the window. A bird skimmed across the surface of Crystal Lake, which looked anything but old or lifeless. No, I said. You already did that. I'm just making sure everyone sees it. He hung up. The silence afterward didn't hurt. It felt honest. For once, I wasn't pretending we were still a family. I was fighting for the part of it that deserved to last. The lake house had been transformed. Twinkling lights wrapped around white trellises, flower arrangements lined the newly built boardwalk, and dozens of white chairs faced a glass altar set against the backdrop of Crystal Lake. It looked like a magazine spread. It didn't feel like home. I arrived early, not to be seen, but to see. Guests filtered in, mostly strangers in designer clothes and forced smiles. I stayed near the back behind a row of rented palms. Emma hadn't seen me yet. That was intentional. The ceremony wasn't supposed to start for another hour. A quartet played soft classical music. Waitstaff passed hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. That's when she appeared. Vanessa, Colton's cousin. I recognized her from a family dinner a year ago. Sharp eyes, smart mouth. She walked straight up to me. "Daniel," she said, "you need to see this." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a PDF, a collections notice addressed to Emma. Credit cards, 5 figures, multiple missed payments. Then another file, a photo of an email exchange between Emma and a university administrator. According to this, Emma never graduated. She told Colton she had a degree in marketing. She dropped out sophomore year. My stomach turned. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I don't like liars, and Colton's about to sign a lifetime contract with one." I looked up from the screen. Her expression was unreadable. "I'm not asking you to make a scene, but I am asking you to make sure he knows before it's too late." She walked away without another word. I stood, frozen fingers wrapped around her phone like it might burn through my hand. I didn't rush. I didn't storm into the dressing room or grab a microphone. I sat on a bench near the back of the venue and pulled out my own phone. Colton's number was already saved. I typed a message, attached the files. "You deserve the truth. Do what you want with it." I hit send. Then I waited. Up by the altar, a photographer adjusted his lens. Bridesmaids fluffed their dresses. A florist scurried with a backup boutonniere. No one knew what was about to hit. Maybe nothing would. Maybe Colton would ignore it. Maybe he'd marry her anyway. But now he couldn't say he didn't know. And that, for once, felt like enough. For now. The air shifted when Colton stepped up to the altar. He looked calm, but too calm. Controlled. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Emma stood across from him, veil down, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. I couldn't hear their whispers, but I could read his body language. The tight jaw, the stiff posture. He leaned in and said something. She froze. A minute passed, then another. Guests murmured. The quartet faltered, then stopped playing entirely. Colton raised his hand, signaling for silence. His voice carried across the rows. "Before we begin, I think there's something my bride should explain." Emma's face drained of color. Colton turned to the crowd. "Apparently there have been some misunderstandings. Financial, educational, personal. I received some documents this morning, and I'd like clarity before I say I do." Gasps spread through the chairs like wildfire. Emma stepped forward, whispering his name, reaching for his arm. He stepped back. "Is it true?" he asked, still loud enough for everyone to hear. "About the debts." "About college." She stammered, trying to smile, trying to charm. But the spell had broken. Aunt Marlene stood up in the second row. "This is wildly inappropriate. Let's handle this privately." Colton ignored her. Emma turned to their parents, eyes wide, pleading. "I didn't mean to lie. I wanted to be enough." Colton didn't move. Silence fell again. Then Emma turned and ran. Down the aisle, past the chairs, through the field behind the dock. Her veil caught in the wind and tore free. Nobody chased her. A photographer slowly lowered his camera. The quartet didn't resume. Waitstaff stood awkwardly near the hors d'oeuvres table. The wedding was over and no one knew what to do next. I stayed seated. Guests began leaving, whispering, texting, shaking their heads. My parents didn't look at me. Not once. Not even as they gathered their things and slipped out a side path, faces down, like that could protect them from what the town now knew. I waited until nearly everyone was gone, then I walked down to the dock and sat. The lake was still. I didn't feel victorious. There was no thrill in watching something collapse, even if it was built on lies. But I did feel something else, something quieter, relief. For the first time since I opened that deed notice, the tightness in my chest eased. Not because they were exposed, but because I had stopped hiding. The sun dipped behind the trees, Crystal Lake shimmered untouched by the wreckage behind me. I didn't know what came next, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The court date came 2 weeks later. The judge was calm, methodical, unimpressed by theatrics. Sophie spoke clearly, citing breach of fiduciary duty, expired power of attorney, and intentional misrepresentation. My father sat 2 rows behind me, jaw clenched. My mother wouldn't look up. They didn't deny the sale. They didn't even try to argue that I had agreed. Their lawyer leaned on the old excuse it was a family matter, not a crime. But the judge didn't buy it. The ruling was direct. The sale was nullified. The property title reverted to me. Damages would be assessed separately. I walked out of the courthouse into a chilly October wind. Sophie squeezed my hand. "You did it?" she said. I nodded, but it didn't feel like winning. A week later, I got word that my parents had quietly listed their home and were planning to leave Oregon. No goodbye, no apology. Emma never reached out. I sat on the back porch of the lakehouse the night before the move was final, thinking about what I wanted to do. Legally, I had the right to sue them for everything, recover the wedding money, demand compensation for the months of deception. I could have made sure they had nothing left, but I didn't. Instead, I transferred ownership of a small piece of land we owned in southern Oregon to their name. It wasn't much. A few acres, modest cabin, enough to live simply quietly, away from the town they had betrayed. Sophie looked at the document before I sent it. "You sure?" I nodded. "It's not about them. It's about who I am. I won't become what they were." She smiled almost sadly. "You're a good man, Daniel, even to the people who didn't deserve it." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some victories didn't need parades, just peace. And finally I had mine. Chapter 12. Alone but not lonely. I spent the next few months bringing the lake house back to life, not restoring it to what it was before, but reshaping it into something new, something that felt like me. I tore down the wedding platform and rebuilt the old dock with my own hands, painted every shutter, replanted wildflowers along the edges of the gravel path. I brought in old photos of Grandpa Walter, hung them by the fireplace. His tools still sat in the garage, worn and waiting. I used them again like he once taught me. Crystal Lake didn't hold memories anymore. It held space, space to breathe, space to begin. By spring, I'd turned the guest house into a small design studio. I started offering free weekend classes to kids from the local middle school. They came with sketchbooks and wide eyes. We built model bridges, treehouse plans, cardboard cities. I saw in them what Grandpa once saw in me: possibility. Helen stopped by sometimes with pastries and stories. Sophie came up most weekends. She never tried to fix me. She just stayed. That was enough. I didn't hear from my parents again. I didn't need to. The lake house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a home. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch, coffee in hand, and watch the water shift in the breeze. I used to wonder what my life would have looked like if none of this had happened. If the house had never been taken, if I had stayed silent. But then I remembered something Grandpa once told me when I was 10 and scared of making a mistake. You don't find out who you are when things go right. You find out when you're forced to start again. He was right. I lost a family. But I found myself. And here in this quiet place by the lake, I am not alone. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, this story is for you. Share your story. You're not alone either. Spring came slowly to Crystal Lake, and I let it. I didn't rush the repairs. I let the silence work on me as much as I worked on the house. The mornings were cold, the air crisp, but I woke with purpose. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the quiet. I took down every trace of the wedding. The platform was the first to go. I dismantled it board by board, each nail like a piece of bitterness pulled free. I sanded and resealed the deck, replaced the rotted wood on the dock, and built a new bench out by the water just like Grandpa Walter once had. I filled the living room with light. Pale curtains, soft rugs, shelves I built with my own hands. Photos of Grandpa went on the mantel. Sophie gave me an old drafting table she found at an estate sale. It fit perfectly in the sunroom. That became my new office. Then I did something unexpected. I opened the doors to the neighborhood kids who passed by after school, to the single mom who couldn't afford aftercare, to the quiet boy who liked to sketch boats. I turned the old guest house into a design lab. No tuition, no expectations, just paper, pencils, and imagination. Saturday mornings filled with laughter and cardboard models and glue sticks. They called me Mr. B or just Daniel. It didn't matter. What mattered was their eyes lit up the way mine once did when Grandpa showed me how arches work. Helen visited on Thursdays. She brought cinnamon rolls and the town paper. Sophie stayed most weekends. She'd curl up on the porch swing with a book while I sketched beside her. We didn't talk about court dates or lawsuits anymore. We didn't need to. My parents never reached out. They left Oregon quietly. I heard through someone at the post office that they settled in a small town near the California border. I sent them one final envelope with the deed to the land I had given them. No note inside. Just the signature and the seal. Some people might call that forgiveness. I call it letting go. The lakehouse, once a symbol of everything I lost, had become a place of growth. The kind that happens when no one's looking. The kind that doesn't ask for approval. One night I stood outside on the dock. The stars were low, the lake still. I watched the reflection of the moon ripple with the breeze and thought of Grandpa's hands steadying mine when I first held a hammer. He would have loved this place now. He would have loved who I became. Losing your family doesn't always mean losing your future. Sometimes it's the only way to find it. I still think about the betrayal, the silence, the moment I realized I wasn't their priority and never had been. But I don't relive it. I've moved past it, built over it, rebuilt myself. And when the kids run up the steps of the studio and yell my name, I don't hear what I lost. I hear what I made. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, this story is for you. Leave a comment. Tell your story. You're not alone. Not here.